I'm sorry I was not able to find a patient willing to be filmed, but hopefully this simple primer will give you an idea of how I do hairline from beginning to more sophisticated. So everyone knows about the Da Vinci rule of thirds. To me, I prefer to talk about a shingle point, which is a transition from a horizontal to vertical plane as the central anterior lowest acceptable point in the midline. A way that I help beginners understand this is I talk about the head like a box. So anything on the vertical plane is the forehead and should not be considered part of the hairline. When you look at a basic design, the lateral point, as everyone knows, is at the lateral canthus. We'll talk about a simple way of making sure you're not too lateral medial in a moment. And the central point we talked about. And then there's this point around the mid-pupil where you can design the hairline in different ways. For example, if you have a wider hairline, then that transition point is less suppressed, and a narrower one at that mid-pupil could be a little bit more suppressed to conserve grafts for different ethnicities, etc. The tendency is for a beginner is to put a hairline way too far forward, and that can look like a hair system because the temples are not adequately addressed, and temples are a very hard thing to reconstruct for a beginner. So it's important that the hairline position and the temples are in relative same degree of unzipping or degree of position. The side view is a critical element. When I teach at St. Louis, I always talk about the fact that if you make your hairline down tilted, this image shows it up tilted. If you make it down tilted, it looks like a female hairline. So a conservative hairline must up tilt, and it must up tilt the same degree on both sides. A parallel hairline is one that's slightly more aggressive or less conservative. This is an important point for both beginners and advanced. I always check myself with a mirror. It gives me immediate feedback very quickly if my hairline is off or not. It also takes into account the fact that the scalp is different shaped, and so when the scalp is asymmetric, it can reflect the light differently, like a line going through water. So you have to sort of merge the straightness of how a hairline looks in a mirror, because that's how the patient sees themselves, and in a 3D mode, and you explain to the patient that little bit of merger of the 2D and 3D worlds is so important. The principle here is to go through each point: central, lowest anterior point, the lateral endpoints, the shape and design. You check your lateral endpoints, you make sure your temples match, and you check for symmetry. So here's a quick guide here. Gentlemen, look at the shingle point. If you look at different points that we've decided, the first one is way too low. The top one, where his existing hairline is, really won't frame his face appropriately. A trick of how to get the lateral canthus correctly is you can take a pencil or your marking eyebrow pencil and just tilt it up. That allows you to really make sure that you don't go lateral medial to this point. And that's a very natural tendency to do that by accident. You can use a ruler to make sure that both sides are the same distance. And once you've got your 3 points, you want to look down and make sure that you see that they're at the same lateral distance from the midline and the same point going forward. From the side view, you have a few options to pick. You can go 1, which is that correct? 2, 3, or 4. When you start to connect the lines, you see the problem. 1 is more of like a weird shape, not really even female hairline, but it's definitely unnatural. 2 is acceptable, but it's going to create a massive temporal point. 3 and 4 are acceptable, and 3 is an upper temporal point, and 4 is the most conservative. So if you look at this is using number 4, you can see that it still looks natural, although you could argue that you could build a little bit more of a temporal point to make it match better. Looking down, you're checking on it, making sure that it's symmetric and the same width. Side view, you want to take a look and you see that it tilts upwards, which is conservative. You want to check both sides. You begin the drawing, a little bit of an arch across there. You continue across the midpoint. And then laterally, you want to connect it in a way that's a little bit more conservative. So I check from the frontal view to make sure it's right. I check from the top view, making sure that it's correct. I check with the mirror to make sure that it looks correct. And again, I check the side view on one side, this look at the tilt, and I check the tilt on the other side. So hairlines, really, practice makes perfect, and a lot of these concepts are discussed in my first textbook. I have no financial disclosures. As you know, I've written a series of textbooks. I encourage you to come to Panama. I'll be running the advanced board review course I encourage you to become a diplomate of the American Board of Hair Restoration Surgery, and I encourage you to come to St. Louis this year, excuse me.